read, say sociale aanpassing is Nina Vensen, which means he's a social misfit. And therefore I was not able to go to any university. I had to be a clerk at the University of the North when people like Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, Unkuputse Tiro were students. And I still have a guilty conscience because I'm the clerk grade 2 who gave a letter of expulsion to Unkuputse Tiro, who was later killed by letter bomb in Botswana. But what I learned from him was that there is no struggle without casualties. Yeah. And therefore, even amongst yourselves as academics, as students, don't think that you may not be casualties. And these casualties may take the form of lack of promotion. They may be that some of you at some time, you may not be promoted. And some of you, like Justice Motshekga, may have difficulties in getting admission. But that is part of the struggle. What I liked was that you are interested in the transformational agenda. But before we go to that, I think it would be fitting that we really observe a moment of silence for the women and children who have been killed in our country. Thank you. And it's not an accident that some amongst us have been so degraded and dehumanized that they see it fit to kill women and children. And not knowing that without women and children, there is no future and there is no Africa. Some people say, let's move on and not refer to the past. But I think that if you don't know where you come from, you won't know where you are going. You can keep coming back to the same place and think that you are making progress. There are some people who wrote a book called The Bible and wrote a big, big lie.
Yo.
And that lie was that we are the descendants of Noah, son Ham, who laughed at his father's nakedness. That was a lie. Because Noah is the descendant of Adam, who supposedly was created in the year 4004 BC. But by the year 36,000, Africans had already invented writing, they were building pyramids, they had universities, and the first university was called University of Anu, in Hebrew, On, and the books which were used to establish the University of Alexandria came from the African University of On. So the knowledge in the University of Alexandria did not come outside Africa, It came from Africa. And therefore, for Hegel and Karl Marx to say Africa is a land of childhood was a dream of the West type. And it is that dream which justified that African people must be enslaved, must be colonized, and must be discriminated against, and even today we are discriminated against. And it was for that reason that Cecil John Rhodes established a British secret society, and that British secret society was financed by the diamonds from Kimberley and gold from Johannesburg. And it is the finances from South Africa which financed the British imperialist plan. And that's why Cecil John Rhodes, when he died, he gave his money to a man called Rothschild and said the purpose of the money was to finance the implementation of the imperialist plan. But our people fought on the side of the British in the Anglo-Boer War, the first one, 1880 to 1881. But at the end of that war, they were betrayed. And our people fought on the side of the British during Anglo-Boer War II, 1899 to 1902. At the end of the war, they were betrayed. And in 1902, the Treaty of Vereeniging was concluded between the British and the Boers to institutionalize racism. And then 1904, Lagden Commission authorized territorial segregation between black and white. And I say these things because I want to say there has never been a revolution which succeeded if it was not led by young people like yourself. And that if you are going to waste your time listening to our generation to transform things, you will be wasting your time. What you must do, you must listen to the president who spoke here. That language is the language that must lay the foundation for the 21st century, because the 21st century has been correctly defined as the African century, which means that you must be the leaders of the African century without fear or favor. There is a young man called Pixley Isaga Gasel. He was just a law student, and he entered a debate at the University of Columbia in the United States. He won the first prize, and the clothing that he was dressed with is what we called during the struggle mpando, because nobody was there to buy clothes for him. He was wearing old clothes, but in the debate, he became number one, because what you put on does not determine what is in your mind. He spoke on the regeneration of Africa. And that speech called The Regeneration of Africa of 1905 laid the foundation for Thabo Mbeki's I Am an African. So the first person to say I am an African was Pixley Isaga Gasene, who was a young student. And Pixley Isaga Gasene said, don't compare civilizations, because you cannot compare Western civilization with African civilization, because the West never produced a pyramid. That's why the word pyramid is not a Greek word, it's not an English word. It comes from pyramid. Pyra is fire, mat is water, and the fusion of fire and water produces life. But today, you are told that pyramids are produced by Greeks. Today, most of our people are imprisoned in churches. And most of these churches were actually sun temples, which were converted into the mosques and also the Christian churches, which means even the concept of a church comes from Africa. And another lie is that there was a white woman who gave birth to a white boy who was the son of God, and therefore we have the mother of God who is white and the son of God who is white, and that is a lie. Because the mother of a man called Jesus, her name was Mary Amun. She came from a black family, and her child was Joshua ben Miriam. Yes. And the word Mary Amun was changed into Yeshua in Hebrew, changed into Jesus in Greek, and then Mary Amun was changed into Mariam, and that's why the only country where you find the surname Mariam is Africa and nowhere else. So the whole Bible was adulterated, falsified to justify the situation in which we find ourselves. I don't say that it's wrong to be a believer, because this universe did not always exist. But this universe was not created by the creator that we were taught about, who is a white man. This universe was created by a woman called Muwari or Muwali Wedenga, the Queen of Heaven. And if you like, that Queen of Heaven was called Kore Cosmu. That's where you get the word cosmic order. And this Kore Cosmu is also called Goremu Guru, and that's why you have Matiza Gole, Golem Papudi. You only find these concepts in Africa and nowhere else. And now, what happened is that this supreme being, who is a woman, because you cannot have a virgin father, you can only have a virgin mother. And if you can't have a virgin father, Therefore, the supreme being cannot be a man. Otherwise, there will be no procreation. Now, those who kill women and children are the most underdeveloped people, and they don't belong to our youth. So I think that if we want to be serious about the African century, we must put women at the center of our lives. We must put children at the center of our lives, and then we can move forward. Now, let me leave this safe to say that we have a problem. I studied legal philosophy at Unisa. I passed without understanding what I was studying. Because philosophy, legal philosophy in our universities and philosophy in general is not philosophy, it's opinions of white people. So when you have mastered opinions of white people, they say you are a professor of philosophy. In other words, you are a professor of opinions, and that's why you will never have your own opinion. And you see, the universe did not always exist. At the beginning, there was nothingness. This nothingness was symbolized by zero or a circle. That's why we dance in a circle, we build in a circle, we do everything in a circle, because we want to reconnect with the beginning. And from the circle emanated an encircled point. That encircled point was called the one or the good, which means Satan did not exist at the beginning. Everything was just good. So Satan is the creation of those who wanted to commercialize religion so that they can trap us into these buildings that are called churches. Now, from the good came the mind or the intellect. And this intellect was a female and male principle. Mtu Ra. That's where you have Ubuntu or Ubuntu. Now, this Mtu Ra was the supreme principle that gave birth to the word. And that's why in Africa, the word is very important. You have Zambia. Zambe means the word of God. Mozambique means the word of God. Gambia means the word of God. Bembe means the word of God. But you say is Limpopo. Limpopo is a corruption of the word Libombo, a mountain that separates Mozambique and the Kruger National Park, which actually should be a Tulamela National Park, not Kruger National Park, because Kruger means many cooks. Now, there was a young man called Sefako Mapoho Makatu from Yatadi in Limpopo. This young man instructed two young lawyers. These young lawyers were Seme and Alfred Mangena, the first attorney in South Africa, to oppose the adoption of the South Africa Bill, which provided for the establishment of the Union of South Africa. And a young man, Seme Montsiwa, another lawyer from Mathole, Simang and Mangena, they convened the founding conference of the governing party, the African National Congress, which means it is young people who conceived the idea of the African National Congress, which became known as the South African National Native Congress, young people. And now, when Seme opened the founding conference, he said, we must bury the demon of racism, tribalism, and all these ethnic conflicts. I was disturbed when I was at the University of Venda when the NEC said that there is tribalism at the university. I asked myself, what is the root of tribalism? Because people who call themselves Zulus today, they are not the descendants of Zulu, the father of Shaka. They were just led by Zulu, the descendant of Zulu. Others are Kangwanis, Mtetwas, and so on. People who call themselves Ndebelets are not the descendants of Ndebele. People who call themselves Mapedi are not the descendants of Mupedi, and so on. So the labels that we have, all of us, have nothing to do with our identity. Our identity is that we are an African people. And now, the question is, what is an African person? The word Africa is a Greek corruption of the name Fu-Ra or Pharaoh, which means the sun. Now, Afura means the land of the sun. Afuraka means the land of the spirit of the sun. So, which means, if you are an African, you are simply the child of the spirit of the sun or the spirit of light. And the spirit has no color, has no sex, and therefore the differences we see amongst ourselves are artificial differences. And the fights we have amongst ourselves are artificial fights. And that's why we must commend the leadership of this continent to have said, or the UNESCO at least, to have said that this year we must celebrate indigenous African languages, because indigenous African languages have spiritual and cultural content. English is a fanagaro, and English is like an empty drum. When you beat it, it makes sound, but the sound has no content. Now, those of us who are fluent in English, we think we are more educated than those who can't speak English. The truth is that the women and men who know no English are the most educated ones, because what they say comes from their soul. Now, 1914, there was a young man called Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey said, why do other people have governments and embassies and Africans don't have anything? We also need to establish our own governments and embassies. And it was Garvey's philosophy that catalyzed the Negro or Harlem Renaissance of the 20s. Now, 1917, Tambo was born. 1918, Mandela was born. Today, we would hero worship Mandela and Tambo and no woman. And the early activists were produced by Charlotte Mathole, Manya, married to Motshekga from Mathole. And that Charlotte was the first woman to lead defiance campaigns in Mangaung when men were afraid. She's the one who helped a Malawian, Clement Gadali, to establish the first trade union. Now, 1999, because Africans are not racists, called for the creation of a non-racial society in South Africa, despite the fact that Europeans had colonized us and oppressed us. And he defined the African National Congress as a pan-African organization. And therefore, for us today to say that they are foreigners, African people inside South Africa who are foreigners, it means that we are underdeveloped, we don't know where we are coming from. And we say Europeans create jobs, therefore they are welcome. The Chinese create jobs, therefore they are welcome. That is a sign of people who have lost the values of self-help, self-reliance, the will for development and progress. We cannot have 80% of the population depending on 20% of the population. The minority must depend on the majority, especially because the country belongs to the majority. 1923, Sefako Makato produced the first Bill of Rights. The opening paragraph says, reclaims the African humanity, Ubuntu, 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 Utu in Swahili, and the right of African people to participate in the economy of the country. 1930, Charlotte Motshekga Manya says, women's rights are also human rights. Now, our people participated in the First World War on the side of the Allied forces. But at the end of the war, they were betrayed. 1935, Haile Selassie had to run away from Addis Ababa. The Allied forces did not help him against an army of Mussolini, which received blessings from the Pope. And that Pope did not even know that the word Pope is a corruption of the word, African word Papa. Yeah, Pope does not mean the chosen of God, it just means father. He prayed for a Nazi, for a fascist army to go and overthrow an African government. 1936, William Nkomo, who convened the founding conference of the ANC Union, said, African people are not a subhuman being, and that they too are entitled to the right of self-determination and human rights. And now 1939 to 1945, 1937, in the same year, as Kiwe Mnandi of Nigeria wrote a book called Renaissance Africa. He lamented the fact that Europeans had destroyed African civilization. After doing that, they claimed that Africans were not civilized. 1939, African people participated in the Second World War. The Mandy ship sunk in the English Channel. Our people died there. They were not compensated even with a bicycle or a piece of land, even today. Now, that is what infuriated Kwame Nkrumah, who said, after the war, African people would demand nothing less than their right of self-determination and human rights. Now, despite that, what happened is that Theodore Roosevelt of the United States and Winston Churchill issued the Atlantic Charter, which gave Eastern Europeans the right of self-determination and human rights, and not Africans because of the color of their skin. And that's where Anton Muziwakele Mbete, Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and East State agents demanded from the mother body, because old people like myself are very conservative and reluctant to move faster than the situation demands. They said they wanted an ANC youth league. That ANC youth league produced the program of action of 1949. Yes. But in 1945, the world collaborated with Jan Smuts to draw the United Nations Charter without the participation of Africans. And that's why J.B. Marx in 1946 initiated Mandela into the art of struggle during the Mines struggle of 1946. But 1948, then you have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted. Despite the adoption of that declaration, the world stood by and watched the Nationalist Party coming to power on the platform of apartheid. Luckily, in 1949, the younger ones, Mandela, Sisulu, Tambo, were elected into the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and the program of action was adopted. And that program of action catalyzed the defiance campaigns of the